Okay. So, yeah, so we have worked through sort of what is a road safety audit, people getting their head around that understanding of the difference between sort of reactive road safety, looking at crashes and crash clusters versus proactively trying to lessen risk or eliminate risk where possible, looking at designs, the way we might look at existing conditions as well. We had a good chat about pedestrian safety last module. They understand you can do audits at that sort of feasibility, early planning stage of projects and concepts, and then detailed design, and then into that construction site auditing. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on this module, into pre-opening and post-opening, and then to existing conditions and thematic audits. So we've covered a fair bit of territory already. They're starting to get quite refined in how they structure the writing of an audit finding, in displaying the issue, the factors that could contribute to risk, the specific crash type that they're concerned with, and then any standards or guidelines if they are applicable. Not, realizing that it may not be applicable to a standard or guideline, or that it may meet standards or guidelines, but it still could be something that appears in an audit, and vice versa. So that's sort of where we are at. And I had promised this group that if they had very, very technical questions, they should unleash them on you, Jamie. And maybe, Jamie, if you jump ahead 2 slides there, I can give a little bit of information about you, and then you can fill in any gaps or correct me if I say something incorrect. But Jamie is our technical lead at Safe System Solutions, and so he's sort of in charge of a design team and a lot of the auditors that do the sort of very technical end audits, where they get hundreds of pages of designs, and they are pouring through those, looking for things that could contribute to death and serious injury of the community. Before joining us here at Safe System Solutions, Jamie was the technical lead of traffic and design at VicRoads, and Jamie and I started back in the day at VicRoads together a long time ago, and worked on different things together. Jamie runs and leads our road safety barrier course, and I know that some people had some interest in some barrier specifics, some of the participants, so maybe those questions will come out today, and also runs a heavy vehicle design course as well. Lots of other stuff there you can see on screen. I've enjoyed just reading a big Austroads report that Jamie had been working on for well over a year now on the treatment of medians on high-speed roads, and how we can get the best safety outcomes with median treatments, with barriers or other treatments, or which choice of barrier you use, and offsets, and challenging design scenarios with horizontal and vertical geometry, and all sorts of fun challenges. Jamie's contact details are in the slides there, so you will be able to follow up with him if you've got any questions. But of course, at any point you can email the training at safesystemsolutions.com.au, and those are filtered through or passed on to appropriate people. And if Jamie's the man to answer that, he'll jump onto it. So thanks, Jamie. Now, the way this session's going to work is I'm going to be in the background, and I'm going to be monitoring the chat, feeding Jamie questions as we go. So pop your questions in early. Jamie may decide to give out a prize or two if he sees some good answers or asks us a question. And then after Jamie finishes, which will probably be a bit after an hour, in about an hour's time from now, we'll have our short break. So it's a little bit past half time. And then I'll do some short presentations and hopefully give you a little bit of time back to catch up on the last quizzes, and to also finish off any outstanding research assignments. I also intend to hopefully have time there to give out some prizes for very sort of outstanding research assignments, although I kind of wanted to give everybody a prize that I've seen so far. We had some really wonderful research assignments have come in, but we'll have to filter that down to only a handful of prizes, which I feel bad for, but at least others will get very high marks. So that's one sort of prize. Okay, so pop your questions into the chat or comments to me, and I'm going to hand over to Jamie, who's going to talk to you a little bit about what you're going to get out of this module.
Thanks, Ken, and good morning, everyone. So today we're talking about, we've called it heavy vehicles and detailed design, and there's a couple of reasons why we want to focus on heavy vehicles, and they are because heavy vehicles do influence road design to a very large degree, particularly around intersections and other things like sight distance requirements and so on. That's the first reason. The second is that heavy vehicles are highly overrepresented in the crash problems that we see out on our road. So it really is important that we get things right when we're dealing with heavy vehicles. Before I get into talking about auditing and detailed design stage auditing, I just wanted to have a bit of a chat about the difference between an audit and, say, a standards review or a design review. Often we're asked to undertake a review of some description. With a road safety audit, our focus really is on safety. That may or may not mean that a design accords with standards. The list of standards out there is long and varied. Any road project brings together any number of different standards. And within those standards, there are desirable values, there are minimum values. And we really do get into trouble sometimes when we look to combine minimum values. So certainly there is a safety benefit to be had by abiding by standards, but that's not to say that something that is in accordance with standards is safe. And conversely, something that doesn't meet a standard is not necessarily unsafe. If we're thinking about standards, we're thinking about constructability, maybe aesthetics, all of those types of things. But with road safety audits, it really is all about safety. So we need to put ourselves in the position of the different road users that are going to be using a piece of road or an intersection, and think about whether they would feel safe. So it's really important to get out there onto a site, think about how safe you would feel. And then a lot of these sort of issues that you'll pick up do come back to standards, and you can quote a relevant standard to support a finding, but I encourage you not to think standards in the first instance when you're doing a road safety audit. So when you are doing an audit, and particularly at the detailed design end of the spectrum, you'll have lots of information to consider. As Ken mentioned, you might have a set of drawings that literally could be hundreds of pages long. In addition to those drawings, you might want some further information. You need to know what the design vehicles are that have been used in that design, and what the design speed is. Those two things particularly influence a lot of the geometric design of a road. What's a design vehicle? I'm sure the road designers out there will know this well, but the design vehicle is basically the largest vehicle that is expected to use the piece of road that we're dealing with on a regular basis. So we want to cater for that vehicle in a desirable way. So the vehicle should remain on the pavement, not encroach curbs, be able to make turns from the correct lane, and so on. We'll later talk about a check vehicle, which is a bigger vehicle again, which we need to check our designs against, but that doesn't need to operate in such a desirable way. We might have some swept path diagrams to consider. You might have some traffic data. Some of this information might come in the form of a design report. You might have some information on pedestrians and cyclists. The crash history of the site often is a driver for a road design project. Some auditors like to see the crash history, some don't. Those that don't have a concern that auditors can get caught up in what's happened in the past and think that those crashes are the only type that might continue to occur going forward. So if you do have the crash history for a site, it's important not to, put the blinkers on, so to speak, and really think outside the nature of crashes that have happened in the past, because there really is a high degree of randomness a lot of the time in crashes that occur. Previous audit reports, if you're dealing with a larger project particularly, and you're at the detailed design stage, it's likely that that project has been audited before. So it's a good exercise to get your hands on those previous reports, ensure that findings that have been picked up before have been addressed. And as an auditor, it's a great educational thing to see how another auditor has considered the same project. So as an auditor, you work with the information that you've got, but I encourage you, if there is information that you feel is important for you to understand, the context of the project or how the design has been arrived at, to seek that from the designer or from your client. We've identified a few common issues that we as auditors tend to pick up in our audits and expect that you might too. So we'll step through a few of those now. The first of those is around the choice of design vehicle. So again, that's the largest vehicle that we would expect to use our piece of road on a regular basis. A couple of images there of a couple of trucks. The smaller one is, I would say, a service vehicle. So that's an 8.8 metre long vehicle that we generally look to provide access to all roads for the service vehicle. It's a fire truck or a garbage truck, removal van, this type of vehicle. The vehicle at the bottom there is a B double, so a particularly long truck that we might need to cater for on major road intersections and particularly on rural roads. There are a number of standard design vehicles that we use that are considered representative of different types or classes of vehicles, and it will depend on the environment that your road is in as to which is appropriate. We're talking about detailed design stage audits, but most detailed design projects are upgrades to existing roads, so you can get out there on site and observe the types of vehicles that are getting around and form an opinion on what types of vehicles the road should be designed for. You also need to think about potential changes in land use that might attract vehicles of a different type to an area. We are seeing increasingly large trucks on our networks. Those trucks don't necessarily perform any worse in terms of the space that they take up, but there are instances where we need to cater to those larger trucks. So what does it matter if we get it wrong? We might find that if we don't provide enough space, that the larger vehicles using the road will encroach into areas that they shouldn't. They might cross into adjacent traffic lanes or cut across pedestrian areas. You might see conflicts between opposing turn movements, and a telltale sign on site is impacts with roadside furniture signs, maybe vehicle tyres or wheel tracks behind curbs breaking up, and these types of things. So all of those issues are to do with there not being enough space for larger vehicles. Things can go the other way as well. We can provide too much space if we assume a vehicle that's too large as our design vehicle, and then provide excessive pavement areas. We can find that it's hard to delineate those pavement areas. We're allowing smaller vehicles to cut corners and make turns at higher speeds, and these types of issues.
Jamie, we have a question that's come in, and it sort of leads me to delve a little bit further into sort of swept path and vehicles and where people can get more information around this and how to think about it as an auditor. So Rowan's made a really good point around an issue that they face in regional areas where designs are done for road trains, but actually B doubles have a bigger swept path than the road train. So you sort of, in general, are indicating that larger vehicles have larger swept path envelopes. However, in some cases that might not be the case. And then you've got those sort of weird ones like buses and then articulated buses and then, these sorts of things. So where do you get the information? And as an auditor also, like, what is your requirement in this space? Are you doing the swept paths? Are you actually getting an auto turn and running those yourself with the CAD files, or are you just requesting them, or how do you go about that?
Yeah, look, as an auditor, you wouldn't be doing those swept paths. If you're really keen and had those skills, you could. But in the first instance, you would request those from the client, and if they weren't able to be provided sort of readily, that's a bit of a red flag. Swept paths should be undertaken as a sort of an integral part of road design, so that and then an intersection and raised islands and the like designed around those swept paths. So request those from the client. Without having swept paths, you might still have an inkling that there's not enough space or a potential issue around space for turning vehicles, and you can raise those concerns. It's a great point around different vehicles and their swept paths. In general, the longer the vehicle, the greater the swept path, but that's not always the case. Some long sort of multi-combination trucks perform quite well. So it's not necessarily the longest vehicle that is the critical in terms of space. So I guess it's the worst performing vehicle as far as swept path that we are concerned about, but also the longest vehicle that can have implications for storage space and other things. So there might be multiple vehicles that you need to consider on some occasions.
Very good, thank you. And I think we'll give Rowan a prize for bringing up that very important point. Thanks. And I think you've got a bit more on swept paths coming up.
Yep, lots more.
Good.
So your key references for swept path information are the Austroads Guides to Road Design, the Part 4s particularly, and the snip on the left there is from Part 4A, I think. The snip on the right is from the Austroads Turning Templates Guide, and a new version of that document came out last year, I think. That spells out all the specifics for generating swept paths for different vehicles. It nominates radii that to be used, turning speeds, gives guidance on choices of design vehicles and checking vehicles for different contexts. So I encourage you to refer to that document. The snip on the left gives some requirements around clearances between concurrent turning vehicles and some radii there. So there's some of the key things to check if you do have a set of swept path drawings in front of you. Have the radii, they've been generated on the correct radius and on a single radius. That's the desirable way to construct a swept path, on a single constant radius. It's a conservative approach, I suppose, but it's designed to cater to unfamiliar drivers that don't know any better and that might approach an intersection at a particular speed, expect to be able to turn on that constant radius and not have to make unusual maneuvers in order to navigate a turn. There's an example of a swept path diagram, and there are lots of lines going on there, and it is important to understand what those different lines represent. I hope you can see my cursor there, but if we consider the purple vehicle, you can see parallel lines on either side. The outermost line is an offset line, and Austroads talks about a 0.5 metre clearance from the vehicle body, that we should provide that 0.5 metre clearance to roadside objects, including curbs. So it's common to show that sort of offset line. The inner solid line is the extremity of the vehicle body. So the vehicle body sort of swept path is, I guess, describes the sort of largest envelope that the vehicle requires in terms of space. The dashed lines that you can see represent wheel paths. There is overhang at the front and the rear of the vehicle, and that's why the vehicle body requires more space. It can be important to know where the wheels are tracking at locations like bus stops or other locations where we might allow overhanging of the curb. So there are options to turn on and off different levels or lines in auto-turn software that's used to generate these swept paths. Another thing that I'll point out are these little arrowheads that you might notice along this center line of the vehicle path. Basically, those arrowheads represent a sort of a decision point or a mouse click when using the software, a change in direction. So you can see quite a few of those little arrowheads on this purple swept path. So that's not an intuitive way for a driver to make that movement. You would like to see them, and the guidance suggests that turn should be able to be made on that single radius at a radius that accords with the Austroads guides. So in this case, it appears that the swept path has sort of been manipulated to try and make it work a bit better and avoid the vehicle coming, the blue swept path coming from the other direction. So you can see there's a sort of convenient offset between those swept paths, but had the purple path been generated in the desirable way, I think you'd see quite an overlap there. The blue path is a better example, a few little arrowheads there, but you can see that it's sort of a smoother turn, with the widest sort of swept path at around the center of the turn, unlike the purple, which sort of has a varying swept path width because the vehicle's turning, then straightening up, and then turning again. Are there any questions around that swept path diagram? So that's I would say a poor example of one, and it sort of reeks of back to front design. It's clearly a constrained location. An intersection appears to have been designed that fits within the property boundaries, and then some swept paths have been put down on the top. Whereas the desirable process would be to construct your swept paths in a desirable way and then design your intersection around those.
We jump on to your next slide there with some annotations on that, Jamie. It's worth, I think, people sort of seeing that where a design may come through that you receive as an auditor, and then you've got some swept path diagrams which are contained within it, and casting your eye over it just in a way to see if anything sort of just doesn't look right to you is a good start as a road safety auditor, and then you may elect to delve further into that. And I think there you can see some of those issues Jamie's just been mentioning, which is that weird sort of abrupt turn that a truck would have to make rather than a sweeping turn. You can see that sort of constraint up to property boundary. What is so you've got one there of a service crossing a private property. What do you mean by a standards review finding there, Jamie?
Yeah, that's something that might be picked up that has no bearing on safety. The conduit there is shown to go through the property boundary. That wouldn't happen. So yeah, you might notice that and be inclined to pick it up, but there's no no safety issue associated with that. So you wouldn't expect that to go into an audit report. If you did notice something like that, you might include it in your covering email or mention that separately to the client rather than put in the report, which might have the effect of detracting from, some more serious issues that you've picked up.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. There don't seem to be any questions specifically at this stage, but I welcome anybody. Actually, one from me, sorry, to harp on here. Speeds, assume speeds of vehicles on swept paths, because that's got to play into it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Austroads gives some guidance on appropriate speeds for different situations. If it's a mandatory stop situation, you'll use a lower speed than a situation where you might arrive at a green light and not have to stop, or a giveaway situation where you wouldn't necessarily have to stop. So Austroads gives that guidance. The lower the speed, the greater the swept path width. So there are benefits in generating these diagrams at a higher speed. So you have to sort of be careful that people are doing things appropriately. A good swept path diagram would nominate the turning speed and dimension the radii that have been used for the turns as well. So just to make it transparent for a reviewer and show that the designer's not trying to hide anything.
Yeah, and that links in with a comment Anthony's made there around where is the value of the turning radii taken from? So how is that choice made? And should that be documented on the plan? And you say that is good practice to do that?
It is good practice. The radii that are given in Austroads, they refer to curb radii. So it's a funny term, but I think it's sort of to do with a vehicle that perhaps was doing it, making a turn or a U-turn on a roadway and ensuring that it could turn between curbs. So it's measured from the outermost wheel path. To answer that question, that's how we typically dimension the radius to.
Yep. Hassan's sort of already thinking about how to adjust designs to cater for this, and talking about pulling the stop line or the hold line there back a bit to try to adjust. What's your thoughts on that as a practice to lessen risk?
Yeah, that would be a potential solution. So look, as an auditor, we've picked up that these swept paths haven't been done in a desirable way. You then need to think about the issues associated with vehicles doing what we can see on the screen, or potentially coming into conflict. And that's our job as an auditor, to assess that risk and come up with some mitigations. So yeah, one of those would be to pull a hold line back. You can see a slight cutting across of the hold line here. You could pull this hold line back, push it sort of further to the north to fix that situation. That does have a disbenefit in terms of efficiency of the intersection, potentially sight distances and things like that. But you can pull the hold line back. You potentially could adjust signal phasing to ensure that the conflict between the right turns doesn't occur, or is at least the likelihood's minimized. You wouldn't expect two trucks that arrived concurrently to continue into a collision situation. They would take some evasive action if the space wasn't there, but that might have some flow-on effects. Vehicles cutting across those areas that they shouldn't, even more. So yeah, it's for the auditor then to weigh up the risks associated with the issue that we've identified around swept paths.
Yeah, that's right. And the reality is that auditors are often pulled in these sorts of situations where we have big constraints in in available land, and you've got particular vehicles, and the developer and possibly the road authority are trying to understand the risk profile and then what possible ways this can be mitigated in a reasonable way. So having a few options in your back pocket as an auditor becomes quite valuable. It's not your role to make that decision for them. Your role is to identify issues and rate those issues, and then provide them with a suite of sort of things for them to think about as they go through moving this forward. So I think those ideas of, adjusting hold lines, single phasing, so split phasing is possibility depending on, other transport objectives that occur there. Banning vehicle movements, but potentially, or vehicle types, or maybe it is other intersection forms. Good. And one more while we're on this. So you mentioned both the design vehicle and the check vehicle, the checking vehicle. Is it a requirement to have that clear envelope for both those vehicles, or are there sort of, if a check vehicle is only coming once in a while, can you be a bit more relaxed in making sure it fits absolutely within all lanes and not mounting anything and the like?
That's right. And I said I was going to come back to check vehicles, didn't I? So the design vehicle, certainly you want to design for it to be able to make its turns from the correct lane, and remain on the pavement. The check vehicle, as Ken mentioned, it's that larger vehicle again that might come along once in a while. And because it comes along so infrequently, we don't design our roadways to cater for that vehicle particularly. We accept that it might need to swing across into the opposing lane to make a turn. It might even encroach a curb or an island, and that might influence the placement of roadside furniture, and we might look to pave behind curbs and things like that, but we don't expect that vehicle will remain on the pavement necessarily. It's a vehicle that will come along very infrequently. It might even come along under traffic management, so the risk associated with that vehicle movement is low. So we accept, we make some compromises. So for any intersection, it's usual to see swept paths for a design vehicle and then a check vehicle, and the check vehicle might be making its turn from wider on a carriageway, doing some unusual things, and it's really just a check to make sure that vehicle can get through the intersection, rather than to demonstrate that it can do things in a desirable way.
Good. All right. Thanks, Jamie. We might keep moving on. I suppose I'll reiterate one of those other points you made, which I think is always important to keep in the back of an auditor's mind around choosing too large a design vehicle and making, especially urban intersections, just big and wide with big sweeping curves, and then small vehicles just shoot around those really fast, and it's a risk for pedestrians and cyclists and vulnerable road users in those situations. So you want to get your design vehicle right and your check vehicle right, and then keep things in those urban areas nice and tight to keep those speeds down. Thanks, Jamie. Let's keep ticking on.
Here's a better example of a swept path diagram. This one you'll see has radii nominated there, and they're measured to the outermost wheel path. It's a 12.5 meter radius for that bus. This is a design that we inherited and had some concerns around the way that swept paths had been drawn. So we did our own checks, and they showed that the design wasn't adequate to cater for the vehicles that were required to use it. You can see the blue swept path. It's a left turn by a bus. It, when drawn in accordance with Austroad's requirements, that swept path would cut across that pedestrian area at the corner and the stairs even, to a significant degree. So that intersection needed to be redesigned in order to cater for those vehicles. If we consider some other movements which would be able to run concurrently, there's some significant overlap between those two vehicles there. So again, things needed to happen there to ensure that wouldn't be the case, either a redesign of the intersection or changing phasing to eliminate that conflict. When out on site as part of your audit inspections, keep an eye out for issues around vehicles, trucks particularly, encroaching into areas that they shouldn't. Clearly at this location, trucks frequently mount the curb when making the left turn there. That may be an issue of a lack of space. It could point to an issue around excessive speed or perhaps a lack of delineation. So it's not necessarily around a space issue or a design vehicle issue, but that's certainly a telltale sign out on site. At this location, you can see a lot of wheel marks on the raised island here and across the pedestrian crossing point. That's obviously an undesirable situation for pedestrian safety. It could be to do with the fact that there's very little contrast between the island and the concrete pavement. It could be that there's not enough space. It's been suggested to me here that there is certainly an issue with excessive speed. This is around the Port of Melbourne, where you do see a lot of long articulated trucks zooming around. So there's a potential pedestrian issue at the crossing point, but the greater issue is in fact on the other side of the crossing, on the inside of the curve, if that makes sense. A truck driver, it's a lot easier for a truck driver to understand whether the front of their vehicle is tracking than the rear. And particularly at low speeds, there's a long articulated trucks cut in by a significant amount. So that the rear axles take a shorter radius path than the front of the vehicle, and you can see trailers cutting across curbs and into pedestrian areas when trucks are turning. And this is an all too common safety issue where we see pedestrian fatalities, where longer vehicles have made turns, often in urban environments where there are lots of pedestrians around and you wouldn't necessarily see many of these longer trucks. A truck ends up there, tries to make a turn, they cut across that pedestrian area and strike a pedestrian. Another telltale sign is knockdown signs or other road furniture. Here we've got the give way sign that's been knocked down. Another common example is a keep left sign on an island at an intersection. There's perhaps no great safety issue here because it looks like we're in a rural environment where you might not see pedestrians, and there's no great consequence of a vehicle tracking over that curb if making a low speed turn. But if you're in a built up environment, perhaps at a signalised intersection, that's where it's critically important to provide adequate space. Another common issue that's frequently picked up is around sight lines. Now, there are lots of different sight distance requirements, and Australis describes them all, but essentially sight distance standards and guidelines are around providing motorists and other road users with enough time and space to see the intersection or road unfold in front of them and react to what they're seeing and come to a stop or take appropriate action. So a design might not provide enough sight distance. When doing an audit, I encourage you all to get out there on site If pedestrian crossings are proposed, walk across the road at those locations. Think about whether you would feel safe doing so, whether you have adequate sight distance. If you don't think you do, then certainly consult your standards to back up your finding. Sight distance is often restricted by roadside objects or the road alignment. Horizontal and vertical curves can have a real impact on available sight distance. And some of these things can't be picked up necessarily from a desktop review. So get out there on site and think about these types of obstructions. Large signs near pedestrian crossing points, things like that are common issues that you might come across. The bottom point there, vehicle stand-up angles, that's talking about the angle at which motorists approach intersections. The desirable situation is that vehicles approaching a give way or a stop condition approach at a right angle or as close to it as possible so that they can see comfortably in both directions to approaching vehicles. It's when we get those acute stand-up angles that we see that Y intersection problem where it's difficult for motorists and particularly elderly and so on to view traffic, to look back over their shoulder and view approaching traffic. One sight distance requirement is abbreviated to SISD. We might have a little poll question here, I think, Ken.
Oh, hang on a second. Hang on a second, Jamie. I'll just have to see if we do have a poll question. Otherwise, we'll just run with it. Oh, no, hang on. There we go. Hopefully that's come up.
It has. What does...
Oh, yeah. What does SISD stand for? People are popping in their answers and some are writing it into the chat as well. But let's run with that. We'll only give that another 5 seconds. I think most people are popping something in quickly. And I'm going to end that poll. Most people saying a safe intersection sight distance, although a few got tripped up there with standard intersection sight distance, which, but safe intersection sight distance it is.
That's right. And it's unfortunately not standard intersection sight distance. It's a requirement that often is sort of compromised on. But safe intersection sight distance aims to provide enough distance for the driver on the major road approaching the intersection to see a vehicle entering the intersection from a side road and maybe stalling in a conflict area. To see that happen, put on the brakes and come to a stop before reaching that point. So SISD requirements can be quite onerous. I think at 100 k's per hour, SISD is something like 260 meters. So that's how much sight distance we should aim to provide in a high-speed environment. This diagram, which comes from Austroad's Guide to Road Design Part 4, 4A, I think, it demonstrates the importance of considering things both vertically and horizontally. Vertical curves can have an impact on sight distance. As you can see in the bottom image, any objects near intersection corners within this sight triangle can impede SISD and reduce the level of safety for motorists. This diagram also does point out an important point, which is to always consult your state supplements to the Austroad's guides, if they have one, because those documents take precedence over the Austroad's guide. Victoria, as an example, says something slightly different to this 5 meter setback or 3 meter minimum. It measures the distance relative to a conflict point rather than a hold line. So yeah, I always encourage you, if you're looking to an Austroad's guide, to look to the supplement that applies in your state as well.
And Isabel has picked up a spelling mistake in the Austroads guide there. Carriageway under the conflict point.
That needs a prize, Ken.
Yeah, prize there for Isabella. That's all right. We like that attention to detail. We'll have to let Austroads know on the next update they do of it.
Here's a little real world example where a fairly major road in Melbourne, with a wide carriageway. It's a 2-lane road, but in heavy traffic conditions, due to the carriageway width, it would operate effectively as a 4-lane road at times. The decision was made to formalise parking along this road, and you can see the yellow lines indicating parking lanes. Those parking lanes would terminate 10 metres from intersections as per Australian standards. So this project was implemented, and that's how it looks. But very soon after that project was implemented, a safety issue came to light involving crashes involving vehicles exiting those side roads. And you can see from this image, the parked vehicles very close to the intersection. It's very difficult to see past those, and a fraction of a second later, a vehicle is upon you. So a real typical black spot project situation where you've got a pattern of crashes involving vehicles entering a major road from a side road. And yeah, this crash problem certainly was contributed to by the project, which encouraged vehicles to park closer to intersections. So now that that has happened, I might put it out to the group, Ken, to try and suggest some things that could be done to rectify the situation.
Okay, so we've got a sight distance constraint there with the vehicle. What could we be recommending as auditors for them to consider? Like, what ideas have you got? Pop those into the chat. We'll run them by Jamie and see what he thinks. Okay, so we've got Ricky first popped in there quickly, removed the first car park. And a few others then quickly said that. Chris is talking a little bit about a curb extension, curb build out. And then, yeah, we've got some people wanting to move the hold lines forward, signalize the intersection. Possibility of a safety mirror or a convex mirror. I'll be interested in your thoughts on that one, Jamie. That's always an interesting one, having worked in a road authority for a long time. Speed reductions on the main road. A bit more support for curb build outs, curb extensions. Possibility of a roundabout. Possibility of traffic calming devices. Gee, it's a good indication that there's a lot of ways you can look to lessen risk, isn't there?
That's right. We've got the full suite of treatments there, right from your safe system primary treatments down to the low cost options. So, if you were writing an audit finding, I would suggest that you include quite a number of those in your recommendations. The best safety outcomes might be had by changing the intersection form to a roundabout or your raised safety platform, or signalising it as someone suggested, but they're obviously the high cost options, but they're your safe system primary treatments, although signalising isn't. Building a curb outstand would certainly help. That would open up sight lines, it would reduce the pedestrian crossing distance, it would allow the hold line to be brought forward as someone else suggested. A quick and cheap fix would be to remove some parking, 1 or 2 car spaces. So lots of different things there to consider. It's always, auditors always wrestle with what findings to put forward or recommendations to put forward for consideration. We're often sort of influenced by what we think is affordable or practical. But yeah, I'd suggest that we should be nominating or including some of those options that provide the greatest safety benefit, and let the client tell us whether or not that's feasible. But so long as we're providing those lower cost options and we're, indicating whether they're primary treatments or supporting treatments and so on, I think that's a good way of going about things.
Yeah, I agree with that, Jamie. And I think, well, yeah, we saw the big suite of things. I think you do need a little bit of judgment as an auditor, what is generally sort of possible within the scope and the constraints and the like, but do, know that you have that ability to offer up a few suggestions so you can, push for what you think would be the safest outcome, but also potentially understanding there's some of their constraints. And parking is always an interesting one, isn't it? You go, just remove all the parking. But if you've worked in a local government, you'll know that that often is just a huge challenge for a number of reasons. And so that just may not be able to happen. And so other things that, could assist. Now, back to that convex mirror idea, Jamie. What are your thoughts on convex mirrors? Mirrors, so somebody could look out and look down the road off a mirror.
Yeah, it's not the type of location where you typically see one of those. I think, they're often those often rural situations where you've got a driveway on a bend or something that's particularly hard to see out of, or you've got an intersection approach with an unusual alignment and sight distances blocked by a building on the corner or something like that, rather than a sort of typical intersection like this. It might provide some benefit, but I think you'd be opening up a can of worms.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, generally, road authorities talk about convex mirrors as a last resort, and you've absolutely tried everything else due to the challenges that they present associated with reliance on it, maintenance of it, the sometimes distorted images, and lack of ability for people to utilize them in an appropriate manner, and so you're putting a lot of weight of risk reduction onto this specific device, which may not actually achieve that. But as Jamie said, in some situations, there's absolutely nothing else you can do. And so that it does provide something. I was actually just writing up a little safe system snippet on the topic and trying to work out how do you word that to ensure that people don't just jump to it as an easy fix in their mind, but actually know that it is there as only the sort of last resort. All right, Jamie, let's keep kicking along. Thanks everybody for the input there. That was good. Oh, Jamie, any particular one of those ideas you wanted to give a prize to?
Oops. Sorry, going the wrong way. Gee whiz. Look, probably a good solution that's a practical one. Yeah, it's perhaps not at the top of the safe system list, but building an outstand and bringing the hold line forward would be probably a good outcome at a location like this.
All right, first one to say that was Chris. So I'll chuck a prize down there for Chris, and it's absolutely not to say that the other ideas aren't very good. I reckon though. Sorry, just to harp on this one. I would say if you build a curb outstand, you'd need to remove parking anyway, wouldn't you? To fit that in. So it'd be, you'd probably still have to, get rid of that park. But all good. All right. Thanks, Jamie.
This slide lists a number of site distance types, some mandatory requirements, some nice to haves. Stopping site distance is your most basic site distance requirement, and that's measured from a driver eye height to an object on the road with an assumed height of 200 mil. We look to provide that everywhere on our roads. Approach site distance ASD is numerically equal to SSD, but it's measured to the pavement itself, and that's important at intersections so that drivers can see intersection markings and the like. Look, I won't go into these in detail, but it's important at the detailed design stage of proceedings to consider these site distance requirements. You might, in your drawing package, have some site distance checks provided. You might do your own checks, looking at long sections and so on, to verify that site distance requirements are met. Oh. Sorry, my computer's playing up. Can you hear me, Ken?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, you're back now, I think. We got an unsealed road in front of us now.
I just wanted to, briefly mention roads like this one. It's a remote road in a rural location. It's clearly unsealed, low volume road. These types of roads sort of present some unique challenges. They don't typically, attract much funding. And therefore, when we're auditing roads of this type, we're limited to some fairly minor treatments. The locations that present the greatest risks on roads like this are those locations where something changes. So it's a curve after a long straight. It might be a section of road where there's variability in the surface that drivers need to be warned of. So delineation and signing treatments are what we commonly go to. So it might be advanced warning of a curve or delineation of a curve, warning of a dip in the road or a section where the surface is rough, and this type of thing. And my last couple of slides list off a number of common issues that we encounter at intersections and mid-block sections. These items come from, or they're listed in the checklists that appear in the back of Guide to Road Safety Part 6A. These are just some of the many issues listed in those checklists, and I encourage people that are fairly new to auditing to use those checklists and make sure that they are considering all of those issues. Many of the issues in the checklist won't apply to a particular situation, but it's a good exercise to refer to those checklists to make sure you're covering everything. At intersections, we're thinking about conflicts between vehicles and vehicles, conflicts between vehicles and vulnerable road users, if there are pedestrian crossing points, cyclists present, and so on. So it's about intersection forms, providing enough space and appropriate facilities for different vulnerable users, thinking about swept paths, and so on. At mid-block locations, we're more thinking about road cross-section, ensuring that batters are appropriate, thinking about roadside hazards and protection of those, providing separated space for cyclists and pedestrians if they're present, and so on. It's really those run-off road crashes that come to the fore at mid-block sections, as opposed to intersection and pedestrian type crashes that we see at intersections. Lots of different issues listed there, and I'm happy to discuss any of them if any of them are of particular interest.
Yeah, if you want a little bit more explanation on any of those, pop it into the chat. I'm going to have a little bit of a talk at the end of this session around checklists or prompt lists, as we have recently updated them to be called prompt lists instead of checklists. But I'll explain all that as we go. We've covered a few of those. And of course, the assignments that people did after the end of module 1 covered off some of these specific issues. And we will be uploading shortly a sheet that delves into about 20 of these issues with little snippets of information so people can get their head around those. Sight distance to signals, where is that covered? Is a question that's come in, Jamie. And this one, admittedly, I have always scratched my head on this. So well, there's two things here. Sight distance to the signals themselves, like as in approaching them, and thinking about back of queue and those sorts of things around what sort of distance you need and what sort of effects there, but then also sight distance while you're at the signals, as in sight distance down the side roads. So do you want to comment on both of those, please?
Yeah, look, sight distance requirements at signalised intersections are the same as at any other intersection. I guess the idea is that we're providing for the situation when the signals might not be operating. So we need to maintain safe sight lines. Obviously, signals, really do minimise the likelihood of those conflicts happening if they're operational and people are abiding by them. But it is still important to provide adequate sight distance and meet the same sight distance requirements at signals. Sight lines to signal lanterns. That's another issue that's frequently comes up in audits. Sight distance can be limited by overhanging trees, by signs, by parked vehicles. There are lots of different obstructions that we see. Sometimes we see some see-through effects where you've got a succession of signals. People might be looking beyond the immediate set of signals to another set of lights. So it's not an issue of there not being enough sight distance, but it's an issue of confusion. There are things we can do with mast arms and warning signs and other bits and pieces to try and address some of these situations.
Good. Thanks, Jamie. Okay, I think people are pretty happy there. So you've covered a fair bit there, Jamie. Anything else to come?
That's the end of the slides, but happy to discuss any of these issues. You mentioned there might have been some barrier questions. If there are any other questions, happy to take them.
No, I think at this stage we're pretty good. I will relay on any specific questions as they, if they do arise. But that's been a really good session. You can see that there can be a lot of technical detail in road safety auditing. I suppose actually more a general question here, Jamie. We've got some of this group are very technically orientated people and do road design and very comfortable with that. Some are slightly, I suppose, out of that very technical end. What would you suggest for them as being part of audit teams of detailed designs if they're not as immersed in detailed design the whole time?
Yeah, look, that's absolutely fine. Any audit requires a team of auditors, and we all bring our different sort of experiences. At the detailed design end, it's more important than at any other stage to have someone in the audit team that does have that detailed design knowledge. But other auditors certainly can add significant value, and it can be great to have people with different skills and backgrounds, to sort of have those discussions around issues and challenge each other and so on. So it doesn't matter that if you're not a detailed designer yourself, so long as there is some of those skills on the team, you're still bringing your your relevant road experience and your experience as a road user to the table.
Yeah, good. Thank you. And I just realized that I hadn't actually asked Anthony's specific question, but then Jerry's answered it, which is exactly where do you find information about site distance to signals. And Jerry's popped in the Australian's Guide to Road Design Part 4A, approach site distance, which I think is correct there. Good, wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for joining us. We are going to have a short break now. Let's take 5 minutes, and you can go fill your coffee up, and we'll get back into it. As I say, I don't have a huge amount of content, so we hopefully will give you 10 or 15 minutes back for you to finish everything off, your quiz and everything in this module. And of course, next module, you're going to get an actual full-blown assignment to do. So we'll go a little bit easier on you for this session. So thanks, Jamie. See you, everybody, back here in 5 minutes.
Cheerio.
Okay, I'm about to get back into it. Hopefully you filled up your coffee there. Now I'm going to talk to you about those road safety audits at construction sites, the construction phase of projects. So we've got the roadworks traffic management and the traffic management plans and the guidance schemes and all of that. So I'll jump into it. The first thing I want to do is just make sure that we're clear on the difference between a road safety audit and what we would call a compliance audit for a traffic guidance scheme, traffic management scheme. So there is a requirement that somebody is checking conformance with the Australian standard, the code of practice, for the things like the bollard spacing and the correct signage use and those sorts of things, and that the traffic management plan has been implemented as it is planned, and that the traffic guidance scheme has been laid out on the ground the way it was planned. Now, road safety audit will do a lot of that as well, but the road safety audit should be thinking big and wide as well, and also questioning whether that's appropriate, some of these specifics in the context that it is. So Austroads is currently embarking on a whole lot of stuff associated with temporary traffic management, and those who do spend a lot of time in this space will know of what's going on with new training, new release of all these new guides. So it's really an area where you do need to very much keep up to speed in the latest of what's going on. And my little word of advice, if you get into road safety auditing a fair bit, the most litigious part of road safety auditing is associated with temporary traffic management construction site auditing. You will find there's a lot of legal action going on in that environment associated with usually an incident has happened and a worker is injured or a road user is injured in a work site. And then there is action from the sort of work cover authorities and companies are involved. And of course, they're trying to shift blame to others, and auditors find themselves in this mix. So it is really important before you embark on a road safety audit of a temporary traffic management scheme that you ensure that you are up to speed in the latest practices, that you understand the processes, and certainly have people in your team that fill any gaps in the temporary traffic management knowledge that you might not have. So there's my word of warning to you. So there are obvious things that are wrong often with temporary traffic management schemes, such as the signage being incorrect, misleading. Classic example here, which unfortunately we see out there a lot. People may speed through these, may miss one sign, not see the other. Those sort of things certainly you would pick up as a road safety auditor. You would also expect those to be picked up by the regular surveillance of this site, and of course by the team themselves deploying the temporary traffic management. So they're trying to attack this sort of stuff from multiple levels, where they're requiring more intense training and testing of those deploying or designing, deploying temporary traffic management schemes, and also then reviews by surveillance officers, and also then the road safety auditing as well. So hopefully plugging a lot of those holes that things could slip through. But I drew this diagram at one point to try to help people understand a road safety audit. Okay, it's not this diagram, it's on the next slide. I'll go through these. Why undertake a construction site road safety audit? So these are immediate changes to the road environment, and often then create this, particular point of risk. They can change. They can change a lot, and I will show in the next slide how we go about dealing with that as a road safety audit team. So if you're, charged with doing the road safety audit of the temporary traffic management for a motorway upgrade, well, it's going to be out there for a long time, isn't it? And it will change as it goes, as different things are happening. So how do you be dynamic enough as a road safety auditor to understand that? We certainly have a big variety of people deploying these sorts of schemes, and yes, at a national level, there's more improvement happening to try to build up capability capacity in this, but it's something we've got to be aware of, that not everybody has that refined view on safety as we do as road safety auditors. Consistency, the applicability of standard designs. A lot of designs sit there as standard designs off the shelf and are deployed. And of course, in some particular situations, it may not be appropriate. And you've got to be thinking context. Conflicting messages between existing signage or existing features and the temporary features. That's a big one that road safety auditors often pick up. And signage used for their correct purposes. So an important one here at the end is that we are thinking about the safety of workers and the safety of the travelling public. However, when we talk about the safety of workers, we're talking about workers that are potentially struck by vehicles or cyclists or other road users. It's not about a workplace health and safety check. So I'm trying to think of a specific example. Okay, if you notice people lifting things incorrectly or the like within their work site, okay, that's not a road safety audit thing. I think just as a general professional, you might want to flag that and point it out and the like, but that's not going in our audit report, if that makes sense. Yeah, so as Vuk said, that would be a workplace health and safety issue, and you would expect that that's a separate process, that somebody is reviewing and potentially auditing workplace health and safety practices. And I only put this in to say that we've got to think about all road users. We think about pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, vehicles. We think about people in wheelchairs, mobility scooters, and the like. I do see a lot of traffic management schemes put out there, which seem to do a pretty good job for the safety of vehicle drivers, and are just horrible for cyclists and often pedestrians as well, just pushing them into, having to walk significantly out of their way to navigate around this. And they just don't do it. They will walk on the road in these horribly dangerous locations. This one, very small job, but absolutely no consideration for pedestrians and cyclists. This probably definitely wouldn't be subject to a full-blown road safety audit, but it's just a reminder to think about that when you're auditing. Just a little one to keep you on your toes. Also give out a prize because I like giving out prizes. We've got 2 stop signs here. Both of these stop signs appear in the road rules, and they have slightly different requirements from a legal perspective on the driver or rider that approaches them. Anybody can tell me the specific difference in requirements for the driver or rider that approaches this sign, and I'll give a prize for that. Now, as people are typing in their guesses on that, I'll just say that these sort of things aren't usually the biggest risks associated with temporary traffic management side. It's important though to get sort of the details right in these as well as your big picture stuff. Let's see what people are saying. Mandatory advisory. No, that's not quite right. They are both regulatory mandatory signs. Yes, one is associated with temporary and one is associated with permanent, but I need a little bit more information than that. Chris is getting closer. Well, not quite there. And yeah, Tellini sort of got there to a degree. James has beautifully clarified it. So this one leaves the road user, after they have stopped to make a decision as to when it's safe to go. This one, you must stop until it is not displayed at you. So I'll give Tellini a prize as well because it's sort of along those lines. But James got it beautifully. I've got to write that down before I forget. Yeah. So we don't see it often, any of that sort of stuff where technically you would pull up to that and then make your own decision as to whether you go. Of course, nobody would do that, but it's not the correct sign. That's what we'd be expecting to see. Okay, this was the diagram I jumped the gun and thought was coming up in the other slide, but I tried to sort of put this into a diagram for people to understand what are we doing with this road safety audit with this dynamic scheme that changes. So you would this is for a decent sized project that's going to have a decent sized temporary traffic management scheme deployed with it. You would review the plans and the guidance scheme before anything happens, right? And you would go out and you would inspect the site, and you would inspect the site before they deploy the works, and then just as they've deployed the works. So you would actually go out there, nothing's happened, but you're looking at, okay, what are the road users here? What is the land use? Where are people going to be going? What's in the general area? Okay, if you decided to, if somebody decided to avoid this area because they could see queuing cars, which they're going to go down these streets, where do they go? What's the land use around there? If people wanted to make U-turns, are they going to be able to do that safely? If people, are coming along here at speed, are they going to see the end of a queue? So you're getting that general understanding of how it's all going to play out. And then you make your sort of comments on that, and then the scheme will be deployed and you'll go out and have a look at the scheme as it's out there. Then, that's all sort of reported up. And then any major changes to the scheme, there would be this inspection of the site, which could feed back into the audit report. It could be adding pages to it. You're not going to write out all the full audit again each time, but you could be adding those single pages of things that could be addressed, and it keeps it in a nice, tight, documented package. So listed here are some of the common issues that may arise in the road safety auditing construction sites. By no means is it everything, but the adequacy of advanced warning. So I always really stress, okay, you've got to be able to understand that it's coming up, but you've also got to be thinking about the queuing of vehicles and where that goes and whether we can see the end of queue and have we provided enough advanced warning. Speed limits. Now, some people are not aware that you can do other speed limits within roadwork sites rather than just the common 40, which is done in most jurisdictions, although South Australia does a different one. And I'll give a prize for somebody who can tell me what the South Australian sort of standard roadwork speed limit is. Ricky, you are prize winner, 25. Yeah, that's right. But in other jurisdictions that use usually a 40 in roadworks, we can still certainly go lower than that, or possibly higher than that. So don't be absolutely stuck on your. Did I ask that last training session? There you go. All right. You still get a prize. You think about the appropriateness of the speed limits proposed. Standard layouts. I really do caution this because temporary traffic management and traffic guidance schemes can get a little bit like a sausage factory where they just churn out these things. And have people thought about them in detail around the context of the environment they're being deployed in and the appropriateness of the off-the-shelf design? It happens less with actual road design, that they're just sort of running with a standard sort of layout. Temporary and permanent features we talked about. Misreading, so that visual deceit for a driver or a rider or a walker. During your inspections, you might see things like mud and dust obscuring devices, appropriate devices if they've been out there for a while, and those sorts of things. Barrier systems are really important to get right, and they are very technical, and temporary barrier systems also are very technical. So you would need to understand some of those really technical things associated with barriers, like calculating the length of need of the barrier system, the flare rates and accepted flare rates, the dynamic deflection and roll allowances, the appropriate connection of anti-gawk screens, the fact that the barrier systems themselves can create sight distance for entering and exiting the work site, how it's pinned, how its end terminals are connected. One that unfortunately I keep seeing, if it's a water-filled barrier, does it actually have water in it? Otherwise, it's just a glorified witch's hat. So those are, some things around barriers. And again, just make sure your team contains somebody who knows a bit about road safety barriers, temporary barrier systems. Pedestrians, cyclists we talked about, and conflict points between work traffic and the general public. So that's probably all I wanted to talk about for roadworks. It's the same process that we use for any other audit, the 10 steps. You can just see that you might do a little couple of little loops within that of adding more to the audit of extra pages during the scheme, which you would, label accordingly. This was done at this date, and these were the changes, and here are some issues we identified. They are also done quickly in the sense that you identify things, you usually document and then quickly talk to the people managing the site, and things are often rectified just immediately, which is great. And we see that, quickly deployed. Keeping documentation of that, though, is important. Just remember, this is the one where if you're going to get sued as a road safety auditor, probably going to be a temporary traffic management road safety audit. Pop your questions into the chat if you have any. Thank you. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about prompt lists. Jamie referred to them as checklists, and they have been called checklists for the last 30 years. However, in the last year or so, we changed the naming to prompt lists. The reason we did that is to just really hammer home that this is not the be-all and end-all. It just prompts your thinking. So where do you find these prompt lists? Well, they are in the back of the Austroads Guide to Road Safety Part 6, which is the Road Safety Audit Guide, which you all can access. Well, you can access all guides from the Austroads website freely, but we're going to pop it into the learning management system if we haven't already. Now, the prompt lists start with what they call a front-loading list. So table H1 is just general questions about the project. It helps you gather context. So when you're meeting with your client, you're undertaking this audit, you could be asking them these questions. They help, prompt you to think about all sorts of things around, is there any information they have around risks? Why are they doing this project? What are their objectives? Do they have any information that could help you around proposed speed limits, future land developments, future growth in traffic, thinking about, some general discussion around strategic objectives for the network and the like. That helps you just gather context and starts you on the process of identifying some risks. Then there are these 5 prompt lists, and you'll see them. So we've got H3 to H7. Local alignment, general aspects, intersection, walking and cycling, signs, line marking, and lighting. So for each of these lists, you can see there that there is a column for feasibility, preliminary design, detailed design, pre-opening, and existing roads post-opening. So you are then able to go through these and use these to prompt a bit of thinking. Now, a lot of these, as Jamie said, are just going to be not applicable because we're trying to cover off every road scenario out there: motorways, local streets, shared paths, arterial roads, you name it. It's trying to cover all of this off. So lots of them are not going to be relevant, but they may spark an idea, something that you hadn't thought of. So you can see there, H6 is around walking and cycling. So lots of good questions to ensure we're thinking about vulnerable road users as well. So some key points here. The prompt lists are thought starters only. By going through that, can't guarantee we've thought about everything that needs to be thought about as a road safety auditor, but it really is good as a new auditor to help sure you've covered a broad spectrum of road safety issues. Just stand back though and look at the scheme and say, how are people going to be killed and seriously injured here when they build this? That's the basics of auditing. Many items will be unknown. Now, an important one here, you do not submit your prompt list as part of a road safety audit report. So you'll have, printouts of these, no doubt, which you can do, and you'll sort of tick ones you've thought about, write notes on it and everything like that. Don't add that to your audit report. Just take the ones that have prompted thought and you identify a finding and then you put that finding in. See a longer question has come in. I might have to have a read of that and deal with it next session, just so I'm not just reading quietly for a long time. So I just wanted to cover back off primary treatments and supporting treatments. Jamie mentioned it when we were talking about that site where the car parking was blocking sight distance, and he mentioned, some of those are primary and some of those are supporting. It's really one that people struggle to get their head around for a while, but then once they get their head around it, they seem to be better. I do point you at this other document, the Safe System Assessment Framework, because they simply list different treatments and whether they're primary or supporting for different crash types. So let me just give you a couple of examples on this to reinforce and hopefully help you out understand what a primary treatment is and what a supporting treatment is. So let's take that job Jamie used, and we'll just unpack some of those ideas that you came up with. Okay, so we're concerned here, we don't have the sight distance that we want. We've calculated our sight distance requirements and we don't meet it. So the first thing you're going to be doing when you do your audit finding, remember, is, well, you're going to describe this issue, but you are going to specify the crash that you are concerned with. All right, you have to specify that crash. Now, the crash we're concerned with here is a vehicle making that turn and being struck by a vehicle there, or maybe making a left turn and being struck by the vehicle, right? That's the crash. Now, if we go back to here, we see that a primary treatment eliminates the potential for fatal or serious injury occurring in association with the foreseeable crash type. So if we were to say, okay, I'm going to remove the first car park or second car park. Now I've opened up enough sight lines to meet the, stopping safe intersection sight distance requirements. Is this a primary or supporting treatment? This is a supporting treatment by itself. It is a supporting treatment. It's not a primary treatment. Even though, okay, the issue you were concerned with was sightline impediment, and we've removed the sightline impediment, right? You have to come back to the crash that you were specifying and saying, have we eliminated the possibility of this crash occurring at the same speed and the angle and the resulting death and serious injury? And the answer is no. Because this person can still make a bad judgment call as to when to go. Okay, they're less likely to do that, absolutely, because they got open sight lines. We still know we've got plenty of intersections out there that have perfect sight lines, right? But people still pull out in front of cars and they're struck at high speeds. So what we're saying there is that that's a supporting treatment. It says it's good. It improves road safety, right? But it's not going to eliminate death and serious injury at this location. The way that we would get to a primary treatment would really be to say, okay, when somebody makes this mistake and pulls out, how do we make sure that that doesn't result in death or serious injury? Now, the primary treatments for this would be something like a roundabout, because we know that that vehicle approaching then slows down and the angle of crash is better. And we would virtually eliminate that vehicle-to-vehicle right turning out crash, death and serious injury. It just wouldn't happen. Okay, so that would be a primary treatment for that crash type. Raising the intersection. That would also be a primary, because we're slowing that vehicle down to an appropriate speed where if the mistake happens, the crash happens, it's all survivable. Some people would often also want to say that signalizing this would be a primary treatment, but it is not, It's a supporting treatment. So, okay, you're going to spend a lot of money to signalize it. We call it a supporting treatment still. Why do we call it a supporting treatment? Well, it's probably one of the, higher effectiveness supporting treatments. But the thing is that we know that we get red light runners at speed and bad angles, and we still see that crash type and death and serious injury occurring. So there's been nothing to sort of improve the angle of crashes or slow vehicles down. Now, if you had your surrounding road environment down at a low speed anyway, then the signals, well, the primary supporting aspect is somewhat irrelevant at that stage, because you're all within safe system tolerances, but the signals may be appropriate at that stage. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense for you. I will take questions now. Vuk, I'm going to have to just pause on your one. It's hang on. If there is no end road sign, at what point does the speed limit get back to normal? Okay, well, technically, until another sign is observed, another speed zone sign, that's under the road rules. The reality of work zones is that people make their own judgment at a certain point. There's a level of acceptance or assumption that signs have just been forgotten. Okay, right. Let me quickly give out some prizes for some fantastic work. I got to find where I put that. Okay, so the research assignments, thank you everyone for your wonderful work and getting it in. And those have been marked, so a bit of a marking team there. You would have got marks from somebody, and then a bit of a judging panel on some prizes to give out. So many prizes could have been given out. Great efforts, great work, but a few prizes coming out for most creative. We have Tim Taylor is winning that for the barriers. And runner-up is Diana for dynamic visual obstruction. Technically sound, the judges say very hard to split. Hassan for stopping sight distance. Farana for audio tactile edge line. And Odin for dynamic visual obstruction. So 3 for that. Whew. The judging panel is being very generous there. They couldn't split it, obviously. Most engaging, Lucinda is our winner with short stacking video. And runner-up is Martin Scott for the sign support structures. So well done to those people. As I say, you may feel hard done by because you put a good effort in and like. Now, what we're going to do, though, is put up a sheet with those different topics and some information. I know there was some interest from others around those topics. And while we wanted to potentially share all assignments with everybody, we just had, there's little bits of technical nuances that we just don't want to, share slightly incorrect or misleading information. So we've got a sample set that we will send out, but thank you to everybody for your work there. Now, you have a quiz to do at the end of this this session, which we're about to close out now. And then next session, you are going to be given a road safety audit to undertake. And that will be at a location close to your home or your office or whichever address you gave us. You'll be given a design of road upgrades, and you will be putting in practice that identification of issues, the writing up of audit findings. We've streamlined it. We've cut back some stuff to make it not take you, sort of 3 days of your time. We've streamlined it back just for you to prove you understand the process of road safety auditing. But thank you all. And if we don't have any questions, I'm going to give you now 10 minutes of your time back to jump in and do your quiz. Thanks, everyone. Of course, contact training@safesystemsolutions.com.au if you have any questions. Thanks, everyone. Bye.